Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a topic that you probably never imagined could make for a cozy bedtime tale: how ancient Egyptians invented the first laundry day. Picture yourself stepping into the heart of ancient Egypt, dust rising from the sun-baked streets, the Nile winding lazily through the land, and the scent of the air thick with heat. The sun is relentless, the work is hard, but the Egyptians the innovators, had a secret. They understood the importance of keeping things clean. Now, I bet you're thinking, laundry, really? But trust me, this wasn't your average Saturday washing spree. The Egyptians' approach to cleanliness was intertwined with everything they did, from their spiritual beliefs to their innovations in technology. You probably won't survive the full ordeal of ancient Egyptian laundry day without a few creative solutions. Don't worry, you can skip the Nile swimming part. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In ancient Egypt, there was no such thing as laundry day as we know it today. Forget those modern washing machines you've probably been giving a side eye to in your laundry room. No, the ancient Egyptians had a much more hands-on approach, one that was linked directly to the Nile itself. You can almost hear the hum of the bustling city, the chatter of vendors, the faint sounds of children running barefoot in the dust. But amid this lively chaos, the Egyptians had a very specific routine, one centered around keeping themselves and their clothes clean. We know the Egyptians were incredibly resourceful, and while they may not have invented laundry detergent as we know it, they had perfected the art of washing clothes using what was at hand. The Nile, as it turns out, played a major role in this ancient laundry routine. And while the river provided water for the populace, it also had another purpose that might surprise you, acting as the first rinse cycle. The river wasn't just about agriculture or transportation, it had a much deeper role in the Egyptians' daily life. As the day heats up in ancient Egypt, you're watching the sun beat down mercilessly over the bustling city streets. It's that perfect moment when everything seems to shimmer in the heat. The Egyptians, ever keen on keeping their bodies cool in the sweltering sun, wore garments made from linen, an incredibly light and breathable material. This linen wasn't just for fashion, it was practical, keeping them cooler than many other fabrics could. Now here's where it gets interesting. Not only were the clothes themselves a reflection of the climate, but their method of cleaning was just as much an art form as their architecture or medicine. Imagine the clothes, sweat-streaked and stained from daily toil, beginning their journey toward becoming fresh once more. The first step in this ancient laundry ritual was, unsurprisingly, the river. The Nile was a vital source for washing, as you might guess. The Egyptians would wade into the shallow waters, dunking their garments, and vigorously scrubbing them with their hands. Sounds familiar, right? But here's where it gets a bit more intriguing. They didn't use soap in the way we think of it. Instead, they used a combination of plant ash and water, creating a kind of natural alkaline solution. This worked wonders for breaking down the oils and grime of everyday life, making sure the linens were clean enough for their intense sun exposure. It wasn't just a chore, it was almost a spiritual practice, the cleanliness of one's clothes was tied to their purity, something that resonated deeply within the Egyptian worldview. Historians still argue whether this level of personal hygiene was more for social status or spiritual purity. In some ways, being clean was seen as a connection to the gods, as if by keeping their clothes spotless, they were symbolically keeping their souls pure. You can imagine the ritualistic nature of it all. Wash your clothes in the sacred Nile waters, and you are not just cleansing your garments, but your very essence. The Egyptians were profound in understanding the symbolism of cleanliness. Now picture this. The sun is beginning to lower the heat. finally losing its edge as the sky turns a softer shade of gold. The linen you watched earlier, once sopping wet from its first Nile bath, is now ready for the next step in its long journey to becoming spotless. The Egyptians, ever so clever with their resources, found a way to speed up the drying process. They would take their damp garments and hang them on lines made from nothing more than simple reeds, stretching them out between poles or along the walls of their homes. But it wasn't just any breeze that would dry these garments. It was the dry desert wind, that constant presence in Egypt's daily life, the very one that made the heat so unbearable, but also played a crucial part in laundry day. The dry air had a magical quality to it, making the linens feel softer and more pliable once they were fully dried. And as the garments hung in the hot sun, they would naturally be bleached by the relentless rays. While the fabric wasn't going to reach the level of white we might expect in modern laundry, it would certainly lighten up, especially after being left in the sun for hours at a time. You might be surprised to hear this, but it was actually considered a sign of prestige for people to have very light-colored linens. The cleaner and lighter the linen, the wealthier you were perceived to be. Quite the opposite of today's muddy outdoor fashion, I suppose. One small quirky tidbit: the ancient Egyptians were so particular about the quality of their linens that they even employed professional laundry workers, or what could be considered laundry specialists. These were people who took on the responsibility of washing, bleaching, and ensuring that the linen stayed in top-notch condition. It wasn't just about washing for them, it was about managing the very essence of Egyptian status. Think of them like the tailors or chefs of today, whose work was intricately tied to the reputation of the wealthy families they served. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on laundry was purely a function of social status, or whether it also had religious significance. Some believe it was both an outward expression of personal wealth and a nod to a greater sense of spiritual purity. After all, this was a society that saw cleanliness as a virtue, and having pristine linens wasn't just for show. It was about staying in the good graces of the gods. Now, as the linen dries in the midday heat, something else is happening on the streets of Egypt. Life is beginning to take on its afternoon rhythm, which unsurprisingly still revolves around the daily needs of the people, including the quest for water. The Nile, with all its glorious bounty, was the heart of daily life, but it was also the most reliable source of one of the most critical ingredients for laundry water. Let's talk about the process of gathering it, which, spoiler alert, wasn't as simple as turning on a faucet. Unlike today, where water is as easy to get as flipping a switch, the ancient Egyptians had to work for every drop. The water they needed for laundry was carried in large clay jars, sometimes so large that they had to be carried by two people, one to hold the jar and the other to balance it. But it wasn't just the weight of the jar that made the task daunting. Water, particularly clean water, was highly prized. People would go to great lengths to find the clearest, freshest sources, because, of course, dirty water wouldn't do much to clean the clothes. Interestingly, water collection wasn't just a laborious task for the women. In fact, ancient Egyptian men also participated, especially if the household had a large collection of linens. Imagine a father and son setting off together to fill a jar, trekking through the market streets toward the Nile, dodging donkeys, pulling carts, and weaving through bustling vendors. The water they gathered wasn't just for laundry, though. It was used for everything: cooking, bathing, and even for the sacred rituals held in temples to honor the gods. Here's a fun little detail: some of the ancient Egyptians used a tool called a shaduf, which is essentially a hand-operated device that allowed them to scoop water from the Nile and carry it to their homes. It's like the world's oldest water pump, and it's still used in parts of the world today. But for laundry day, this tool wasn't just about practicality. It represented a certain connection to the land and the river, as well as a respect for the environment that the Egyptians relied upon. Historians still debate whether the shaduf was developed primarily as a tool for agriculture, or if it was originally intended for domestic tasks like gathering water for laundry. Regardless, it's pretty clear that it was an essential part of the Egyptians' laundry routine ensuring that their clothes were clean and ready for the next phase of their day-to-day activities. Now that the linen is drying and the water has been gathered, you'd think that the hardest part of the Egyptian laundry process would be over, right? But as with most things in the ancient world, there's always another step before you can call it a day. And for ancient Egyptians, that next step was the treatment of the cloth itself, the washing process. Remember that this wasn't just about scrubbing away dirt. It was about using a mixture of ingredients that would clean the fabric, soften it, and make it smell fresh. But don't get too excited. This wasn't as simple as tossing your clothes in a machine with a dollop of detergent. No, the ancient Egyptians were far more resourceful than that. They had a secret weapon, and it sounds almost too bizarre to be true, urine. Yes, you read that correctly. Urine, specifically aged urine, was highly prized by Egyptians as a key ingredient in their laundry ritual. In fact, they would collect it, let it ferment, and then use it as a form of bleach and cleanser for their clothes. It's a bit gross by today's standards, but it worked. Urine contains ammonia, which helped break down stains and lighten fabric. The use of urine wasn't limited to just the Egyptians, by the way. In ancient Rome, for example, laundry workers called phallones were also known to use urine to treat cloth. They'd even keep vats of it in their shops for anyone who needed it. While it may sound like something out of a medieval horror story, it's actually a pretty clever use of natural resources. The Egyptians didn't stop there, though. They also had a variety of other ingredients to assist with washing their clothes, such as plant-based detergents made from soapwort, a plant known for its natural lathering properties. Soapwort was probably one of the more pleasant-smelling parts of the process, though. It helped remove the oils and grime from fabric without causing it to degrade, which was crucial in a society that wore linen almost exclusively. One of the things that's always struck historians about Egyptian clothing is how well it stood the test of time. Linen is a strong, durable fabric, and they knew how to treat it right. To keep the linen soft, Egyptian women would sometimes use oils extracted from plants like flax sesame or castor. This wasn't just a luxury either. These oils kept the fabric from becoming stiff and scratchy. Imagine a freshly laundered sheet, soft and smooth from years of being cared for with these natural oils. It's not exactly the high-tech softeners we're used to today, but it worked, and it worked well. Historians still argue about the full extent of the Egyptians' laundry methods, whether they used urine more as a stain remover or for its cleansing power, and whether other oils and substances were mixed in as well. What we do know is that they mastered the art of keeping their linen soft, fresh and as clean as possible, with nothing more than their resourceful ingenuity. So the linen has been treated with aged urine, scrubbed with soapwort, and softened with oils. Pretty impressive, right? But there's still one more element of the Egyptian laundry routine that you might find curious: the drying process. By now, you're probably thinking, they're just going to hang it out in the sun, right? Well, yes and no. You see, the Egyptians didn't just hang their linens anywhere. In fact, they had a specific system in place for drying, which shows just how practical they were when it came to maximizing the resources around them. The first step involved spreading the fabric out on flat stones or on a bed of reeds that had been laid out to catch the desert sun. These linens weren't hung on laundry lines like we're used to today. Instead, they were placed on surfaces that allowed the hot desert air to dry them quickly while keeping them flat. The process wasn't entirely passive, though. Egyptians, ever the perfectionists, would sometimes gently press or roll the cloths to remove excess water, ensuring that it dried in an even and uniform manner. And while this method might sound simple, it was actually quite effective. Linen, being naturally breathable, would dry quickly, leaving it soft and fragrant. The real trick was in controlling the humidity. Egypt, after all, is a desert, and the last thing you wanted was your laundry drying too fast or unevenly, especially with delicate linen. The other interesting thing about drying linen in ancient Egypt was that it wasn't just about speed, it was about aesthetics too. Clean linen in Egyptian society was a symbol of purity and order. It wasn't enough for linen to be clean. It had to be immaculate. Just imagine how crisp and white that linen must have looked under the bright, relentless sun of the Nile. It would almost gleam, standing in contrast to the warm, dusty tones of the rest of the environment. Now, this process didn't happen overnight. The ancient Egyptians would keep an eye on their laundry, monitoring the drying process to ensure that the linen didn't get stiff or brittle. In fact, they often employed a clever trick to avoid the crispness that came from too much sun exposure, rolling the linen back up and allowing it to rest before unfolding it once again. This way, they could preserve the fabric's flexibility and softness, making it more comfortable to wear. By the time the drying process was complete, you could expect linen to look almost ethereal, soft, clean, and ready for use in whatever part of life was next. Whether it was turned into clothing, bed linens, or even wrapping for mummies. Yes, you heard me right. The effort put into its care made it one of the most prized commodities in ancient Egypt. And you'd imagine with all this attention to detail that the process of laundering would be seen as a form of art practiced with care and dedication. No wonder it became so integral to Egyptian society. Historians still argue about just how complex the drying methods were, whether multiple layers of fabric were dried at once, or if only the most precious linens were given special treatment. Some believe the high priests and noble families would have had access to the best drying spots, where the air was more favorable, while the common folk may have relied on the public drying areas near the Nile. Whatever the case, the care they took in drying their linen speaks volumes about how important cleanliness, purity, and practicality were in their everyday lives. Now that the linen has been dried to perfection, it's time to move on to the final phase of the laundry process, the folding and storing. But don't think that this part of the process was some simple afterthought. No. In fact, this was just as detailed and meticulous as the washing and drying steps. The ancient Egyptians took immense pride in their linen, and folding it correctly was a ritual in itself, not just a mundane task. First, let's talk about the linen itself. By now, after all that effort to cleanse and dry it, this fabric was more than just a piece of cloth. It had a weight to it, a sense of importance, that no modern-day sheet or towel can match. Linen, as we know, is light, but durable, and its softness was something to be revered. Folding it required careful hands, and it was often done in such a way that the fabric remained pristine for as long as possible. The Egyptians had a particular way of folding linens to ensure they were neatly stored. While we might simply fold our clothes into squares or rectangles, the Egyptians often used a method where the fabric was rolled or folded in a manner that kept it free of creases. The goal was to prevent any damage to the fabric, ensuring that it would last longer, and the linens were typically rolled into tight uniform bundles, especially when it came to storing them for longer periods, whether for future use or, interestingly enough, for burial. But why would the Egyptians fold and store linens for the afterlife, you might wonder? Well, in ancient Egypt, linen was seen as a symbol of purity, and it played a crucial role in burial rituals. The pharaohs and other high-ranking individuals often had linens placed in their tombs as part of their journey to the afterlife. It wasn't just for comfort, it was to ensure the deceased would have what they needed in the next world. Now, don't get the wrong idea. It wasn't just any old linen that was buried. No, this was top-tier stuff. The kind of linen that had gone through this entire washing and folding process and was then set aside for eternity. But for those who weren't about to be embalmed and wrapped up like a mummy, the linen would be neatly folded and stored in chests or on shelves, away from the dirt and dust of everyday life. These were no simple closets or wooden boxes. They were often purpose-built, highly decorative pieces of furniture designed to keep the linens pristine. Some were even kept in special rooms with temperature control, ensuring that the linens stayed soft and fresh for years to come. Now, don't think that just the wealthy or the pharaohs had access to this level of care. No, even the common folk who didn't have tombs to fill with linen were very particular about their laundry. If they could afford it, they'd keep their linen stored with as much care as possible. It was a way of ensuring the longevity of their clothes and bedding, but it was also a symbol of their social standing. To have neatly folded, well-maintained linen was a mark of personal pride, and even a way to communicate one's status to others. As we're talking about storing linens, let's take a moment to think about the storage conditions. Ancient Egyptians, ever the problem solvers, would have taken great care in creating the perfect storage spaces. They understood the importance of ventilation. After all, you wouldn't want your beautiful linens to rot in damp, musty conditions. So these storage chests were often raised off the ground, preventing any moisture from creeping in from the floor. They might also have had small ventilation holes carved into them, ensuring that any humidity could escape and that the linen stayed dry. What's interesting is that linen wasn't the only material to undergo this careful folding and storing process. Other garments like wool and cotton might have been stored in a similar fashion, but it was the linen that was most prized. Its relationship with Egyptian culture from the very beginning of the process to the final fold was one of reverence. It wasn't just a necessity, it was a sacred part of their life cycle. Historians still argue about how exactly the linen was folded in ancient Egypt, whether it was a simple rectangular fold or a more complex method designed to keep the fabric in pristine condition. Some scholars suggest that certain folds may have been ceremonial, passed down through generations, while others believe the method of folding could differ by region or class. We may never know for sure, but one thing is certain: the effort they put into storing their linens reflected their overall worldview. For the Egyptians, even the simplest things like folding laundry could have deeper symbolic meanings tied to their beliefs about purity, life, and death. As we wrap up the process of folding and storing, let's take a moment to consider the social and cultural implications of Laundry Day in ancient Egypt. You see, in a society as tightly woven as theirs, laundry wasn't just about cleanliness. It was an event, a marker of status and routine, a demonstration of care and discipline. It was far more than a task. It was an essential part of daily life, a reminder of the interconnectedness of everyone in the community, from the lowliest laborer to the grandest pharaoh. To understand this, let's imagine for a moment that you are an ancient Egyptian, perhaps a middle-class merchant or a high-ranking servant in the house of a noble. You wake early, just as the sun begins to stretch its first rays across the desert horizon. The air is still cool, but you know it won't stay that way for long. The day is about to heat up. You're surrounded by the smells of the morning fresh bread from the baker's oven, the sharp tang of the Nile's waters, and the faint sweetness of fig trees. It's laundry day, and while it's a chore, it's also a ritual that binds you to your past and future. You and your household know that the linen you wear, the fabric you sleep in, the cloth that protects you from the heat of the sun, these things are not just tools of survival. They're symbols. They're part of how you present yourself to the world. When you wash, dry, and fold your linens, you're not just preparing for another day of work. You're aligning yourself with the larger rhythm of Egypt's history, of its gods, its kings, its rituals, and its eternal order. These small acts of care become part of a much larger narrative of civilization itself. Historians still argue whether Laundry Day was universally perceived as a low-status chore, or whether it was seen as an art, an act of intentional purification. On one hand, laundry was something most people would have seen as a necessary but unremarkable part of the day. After all, there was no avoiding the dust and dirt of the streets, or the grime of daily life. On the other hand, the Egyptians were perfectionists in every aspect of life, and so it's not far-fetched to imagine that even something as humble as washing clothes could have been elevated into an art form. Perhaps in the homes of the wealthy, the act of washing clothes was treated with the same reverence that we might reserve for preparing a ceremonial feast. This idea of laundry as ritual isn't limited to Egypt. In many ancient cultures, the act of cleaning clothes went far beyond mere practicality. In ancient Rome, for instance, fullers, those who washed clothes, were highly respected as their craft was crucial to maintaining the outward cleanliness and status of Roman citizens. Similarly, in medieval Europe, the laundry was often seen as a sacred act one that reflected the inner purification of the soul. Just as washing the body was seen as a way to prepare for religious ceremonies, washing the linens that dress the body could be seen as a form of cleansing one's spirit. But let's not get too caught up in the philosophical side of things. In ancient Egypt, the process of cleaning linens was also just a part of daily life. Even those who lived outside the grandeur of royal palaces and temples still understood the value of fresh, clean linens. The lower classes might not have the luxury of elaborate linen storage chests, but they still went to great lengths to ensure their clothing was clean. For the same reason you might toss your laundry into the washer today, to feel better, to keep healthy, to be presentable. In fact, the importance of linen as a marker of social status cannot be understated. As we've already seen, linen was expensive, and the process of getting it clean was labor-intensive. This meant that linen became a currency of sorts, a way for Egyptians to display their wealth. Those who could afford it had their linen washed, dried, and folded by professionals in special establishments known as laundry houses. These establishments were often located near the Nile River, making use of the river's water for cleaning. But as with most things in Egypt, even the act of going to a laundry house was more than a simple errand. It was a social activity, a place where gossip was exchanged, deals were struck, and communities were formed. These laundry houses became hubs of local activity where people could not only wash their clothes, but also catch up on the latest news or even find new business opportunities. In fact, some historians suggest that these houses might have been more than just places to clean fabric. They were communal spaces that reinforced the close-knit nature of Egyptian society. Now let's zoom back in on the specific task at hand. After the linen was folded and stored, it was time to assess how well the task had been completed. Was the linen still soft? Was it free of wrinkles? Did it retain its color? The ancient Egyptians had an eye for detail, and they understood that the quality of their linens said much about their ability to perform their daily duties. In fact, it said that even small wrinkles or imperfections in a sheet were a sign of carelessness or lack of attention. A perfectly folded linen was a sign of a well-run household, a mark of discipline and pride. But as the sun climbed higher in the sky and the day's heat intensified, you could see that this process wasn't just about cleanliness. It was also about ensuring the longevity of your belongings, of keeping the linen in good shape for as long as possible. Just as we might repair clothes today to extend their lifespan, the ancient Egyptians would have taken care to mend any tears or imperfections in their linens, preserving them for as long as they could. And so with each completed fold and neatly stacked pile of linens, you were left with a sense of accomplishment, even though the work was hardly ever glamorous. Like so many tasks in ancient Egypt, laundry was an act of service done without fanfare, but full of purpose. As the day wears on and the heat of the sun intensifies over the land, let's shift our focus to one of the most interesting aspects of ancient Egyptian life that intersects with our humble laundry day, the relationship between cleanliness and religion. The Egyptians were deeply spiritual, and their daily rituals and practices were informed by their understanding of the world gods and the afterlife. It wasn't just about removing dirt from fabric, it was about removing spiritual impurities too. Now this is where it gets a little fascinating. Ancient Egyptians believed that cleanliness wasn't just a physical state, but a divine requirement. In fact, being clean was a way of showing respect to the gods. In the temples, priests would undergo elaborate purification rituals before entering sacred spaces to ensure they were spiritually clean. These rituals often involved not just washing the body, but performing symbolic acts of cleansing, such as wearing freshly cleaned linen. Imagine this. You spent the whole day washing, scrubbing, and drying the linens, and just as the final pieces are folded, your mind drifts to the connection between your actions and the larger cosmic order. As you lay the linens out, you can almost feel the pull of the divine. Those carefully cleaned sheets and clothes aren't just preparing you for the day ahead, they're preparing you for the afterlife. The Egyptians were particular about these things. A clean body and clean clothes ensured that you could travel into the afterlife with dignity. Without cleanliness, the journey to the afterlife would be far less pleasant. Historians still debate whether this belief in cleanliness as a divine act was universal among all Egyptians, or was primarily reserved for the upper classes and priests. We know that the elite certainly adhered to these practices, and even pharaohs, the living gods themselves, went to great lengths to ensure their attire was spotless, both literally and symbolically. For them, it wasn't just about social status. It was a sacred act of maintaining their connection to the divine. So when they washed their linens, it wasn't only an act of personal care, but also a nod to their divine role in the universe. This spiritual connection to cleanliness extended to everyday life too, in ways that might seem peculiar to us today. In some instances, the Egyptians would even perform small rituals before washing their clothes. These rituals were often simple acts of blessing, invoking the protection of gods like Osiris or Thoth, who were associated with life, death, and order. For these deities, cleanliness symbolized purity, and purity symbolized alignment with cosmic harmony. On a more practical note, let's circle back to the actual process of washing, but with a focus on the materials used. The linen, which we've already discussed as being of paramount importance, was also seen as a natural material that held a certain connection to the divine. Linen was made from the flax plant, a crop that was highly revered in Egypt. It was said that the flax plant was the embodiment of the goddess Isis, who represented fertility and the rebirth of life. So, in a way, the very act of washing linen was a spiritual exercise. It was an attempt to keep the forces of the universe in balance, to renew the connection to the gods with every clean garment and sheet. The linen itself, once it was cleaned and dried, would become the cornerstone of the Egyptian wardrobe. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The very act of wearing freshly cleaned linen was a sign of purity, both for the body and the soul. In this sense, the clean white linen could almost be seen as a protective garment against the harsh forces of chaos that lurked in Egyptian life. Wearing clean clothes, particularly linen, was a way to shield oneself from spiritual harm. But as we know, the Egyptians weren't just concerned with the afterlife, they lived fully in the present too. So let's consider how their laundry rituals might have been influenced by their understanding of the cycles of life and death. Just like the Nile River, which flooded every year, bringing life to the land laundry day, became a recurring ritual, a metaphor for rebirth. The cycle of washing, drying, and folding echoed the renewal of the earth after the floods. The fabrics that were washed were symbols of rejuvenation, ready to be worn once again. Now we can turn our attention back to the actual task of drying the linens. Much like the drying of crops after a harvest, the drying of linens in ancient Egypt was an essential part of the process. The Egyptian sun, relentless and unyielding, played its role as both a practical and spiritual partner in this process. While the sun dried the linens, it also symbolically purified them. The sunlight was thought to contain a divine energy that could cleanse not just the linen, but the very soul of the person wearing it. The linens were spread out on drying racks or left to flutter in the dry desert wind. The very act of hanging linen under the sun wasn't just about getting it dry. It was a process of turning the ordinary into something sacred. The heat of the sun might scorch your skin, but it also imbued the linen with a celestial power that transcended the physical. The heat, the wind, and the intense Egyptian sun became intertwined, with the belief that cleanliness in all its forms was the key to preserving order both in life and beyond the grave. As you step back and admire your work, the drying linen now glistening under the afternoon sun, you're not just looking at a pile of clean clothes, you're looking at a small reflection of Egypt itself, order, harmony, and a deep connection between the material and the spiritual. And perhaps for just a moment you can feel that connection in the air, the stillness of the desert, the hum of daily life, and the warmth of the sun working its magic on the linen, just as it has for centuries. As you continue your work with the drying linens, the afternoon slowly shifts into evening, and it's time to consider another critical element of Egyptian laundry day, the process of ironing or smoothing the fabric. Today, ironing might seem like a mundane chore, but for the ancient Egyptians, it was more than just about flattening wrinkles. In fact, it had a symbolic and practical function interwoven with the rituals of daily life and cleanliness. While the modern iron might come to mind, the ancient Egyptian version was far more rudimentary, though equally effective in its own way. Egyptians used flat stones or metal implements heated in the sun to smooth out the wrinkles in their linen. But the process of ironing wasn't just a matter of getting the fabric to look neat. It was a continuation of the purification process, and in a world where appearances were intertwined with spirituality, how one presented oneself was a direct reflection of one's standing in the eyes of the gods. So, when you took the freshly washed linen, stretched it over a flat stone, and applied pressure with a heated tool, you weren't just smoothing wrinkles, you were ensuring that the garment stayed pristine and pure, ready to carry its wearer through the day without any signs of disorder or impurity. And in the Egyptian mindset, wrinkles or dirt weren't just physical imperfections, they were symbolic of chaos. Order was essential in all things, even in the clothes you wore. In the homes of the wealthy, this task of ironing linens was often delegated to servants or attendants who were skilled in the art of fabric care. But for those of a lower status, it was a task done by hand, often by women who worked to ensure that every piece of clothing was perfectly pressed and free of creases. Even for the working class Egyptians, this small but significant task wasn't just a household chore. It was an integral part of keeping the divine order intact. The Egyptians understood that the world could easily fall into chaos, and if a simple thing like a wrinkle in a linen garment could be avoided, then they were doing their part in maintaining that balance. And then, of course, there's the sheer practicality of ironing. With the scorching Egyptian sun beating down on the land, the need for breathable, lightweight clothing was essential. Linen, as the fabric of choice, was not only a symbol of purity, but also of comfort. The press ensured that it retained its lightness and softness, making it ideal for the heat of the day. Without this careful pressing, linen might stiffen or become less comfortable, and for people who spent much of their time outdoors, the last thing you wanted was to be trapped in a hot, stiff fabric that restricted your movements. Whether you were a farmer, a priest, or a royal, comfort in the heat was a luxury, and linen's versatility was one of the key reasons it was so revered. But what about the social status of the people involved in these tasks? As much as Egypt revered cleanliness, it also had a very structured society where each individual's role was clear. If you were a servant or slave, you would be spending a lot of time smoothing linens, preparing garments for the wealthy elite. Meanwhile, those of the elite class were seen as the ones who wore the beautifully pressed linen, basking in the purity and refinement it symbolized. Ironically, the more you were associated with cleanliness and appearance, the more you were required to perform or manage these tasks for others. Historians have long debated the roles of servants in ancient Egypt. Were they merely tools of convenience, working in silence, or did they participate in the rituals of cleanliness and purity as well? Some scholars argue that servants had little agency in the process of daily life, while others suggest that they were just as attuned to the symbolism of cleanliness as the wealthier Egyptians, participating in the divine process of purification alongside their masters. As the afternoon fades and the night approaches, the ritual of ironing takes on a more meditative quality. The sounds of the tools being pressed into the fabric, the soft hiss of the heated stone or metal, the faint scent of scorched linen each moment reinforces that this wasn't just a task. This was part of a larger cultural process, a ritual that maintained balance and ensured that the everyday was intertwined with the divine. And as you finish the last of the linen, perhaps now more than ever, you appreciate the full weight of the day's labor. You've washed, dried, and pressed, and every part of the process has been a small offering, a gesture toward purity and order, a quiet act that ensured your world would remain in balance. And in the glow of the evening, as the linen rests, before it's folded or hung in its place, you can almost feel the subtle energy of the process, cleanliness, in body and soul, in cloth and in spirit. The linen you've worked so hard to prepare is no longer just fabric. It's a living, breathing part of the world that continues to revolve around you. The heat of the day has finally begun to ease, and you, along with the linen, rest, quiet, still, and ready for whatever comes next in the ancient rhythms of Egyptian life. With the linens pressed, dried, and folded, the final stage of the laundry day ritual begins the storage and preservation of the garments. Now this might seem like the least dramatic part of the process, but in ancient Egypt, even the act of putting away clothes carried its own set of customs and expectations. The way you stored your garments, whether they were the finely spun linen of the wealthy or the more humble homespun fabric of the working class, was crucial to maintaining their cleanliness and the order of the household. In a time when many materials were precious and labor-intensive, to make the idea of preserving garments properly wasn't just about longevity. It was a part of ensuring that the clothing remained pure, untainted by outside influences, and that it could serve its wearer with dignity for as long as possible. And for a people who placed immense value on ritual, the way garments were stored, handled, and even the places they were kept were just as sacred as the washing and ironing processes themselves. The wealthy Egyptians, who were accustomed to the finest fabrics, often stored their linen garments in wooden chests intricately carved with symbols of wealth and prosperity. These chests were sometimes adorned with hieroglyphs that represented protection, fertility, and divine favor, reflecting the significance of the clothing inside. The linen garments themselves would be carefully folded, sometimes scented with oils or herbs to preserve their freshness. These chests weren't merely functional, they were an extension of the owner's status. A well-constructed chest was an important family heirloom passed down through generations. On the other hand, the common folk, while lacking the ornate chests of the elite, were just as mindful of where they placed their linens. Many of them kept their clothes in woven baskets or simple wooden boxes, though the idea of preservation remained paramount. These storage containers, often kept in cool, dry spaces of the home, ensured that the garments would stay fresh for longer. It's fascinating to think that despite the differences in class, the idea of caring for clothing in such a deliberate, ritualized way existed across the board. As you place each piece of clothing into its designated container, you might notice how these seemingly simple items are treated with care and reverence. To fold a garment of linen wasn't just a mechanical act, it was a ritual of preservation, ensuring the clothing would last and remain pure for the next wearing. And this wasn't just about practicality, it was a deeply ingrained cultural norm. In a world where the physical and spiritual realms often intertwined, ensuring that clothing was protected from dirt pests and the elements was a form of keeping one's soul and body in harmony. To have your clothes stored correctly was a sign of respect for the divine forces that govern daily life. Historians have long debated the role of clothing in ancient Egyptian society, whether garments were purely practical or carried more symbolic weight. Some scholars argue that clothing was deeply embedded in the culture's religious rituals used to signal purity and protection. Others suggest that while important clothing was primarily a means of practical comfort and social status, yet one thing is clear: the act of storing and caring for these garments was no mere afterthought. It was another step in maintaining the divine order and balance that Egyptians worked so hard to uphold. As you finish folding the last garment and tuck it away into its proper place, there's a moment of quiet satisfaction. The laundry is done, the linen is safe, and your small part in the cycle of Egyptian daily life is complete. But even as the final folds are made, you can't help but feel the weight of the day's work settle into your bones. You've engaged in a ritual that has been passed down for centuries, and in that quiet, repetitive motion, you've become part of something much larger than yourself. The ancient rhythms of daily life tied to the changing seasons, the rise of the sun, and the ebbing of the Nile are alive in you as much as in the Egyptians who have come before. The day's heat has finally softened into the coolness of the evening, and with the garments safely stored, it's time to rest. You step back from your work, looking around at the clean, orderly home you've helped maintain. The linen, so carefully washed, dried, pressed, and stored, stands as a symbol of purity and order. You've played your part in this great dance of civilization, a task that might seem mundane to some, but which is woven deeply into the very fabric of Egyptian society. And with that, you rest, knowing that tomorrow will bring another round of laundry, and the cycle of cleanliness and purity will continue, much as it has for centuries. As night falls over ancient Egypt, the city grows quieter, but the reverberations of the day's activities linger in the air. The day's heat is a fading memory, and the cool night air whispers through the streets of Thebes, carrying with it the faint smell of the river and the lingering traces of perfume worn by women and priests alike. You sit back looking over the freshly laundered garments and feel the satisfaction of a job well done. But there's more to this than simply washing and storing clothes. The ritual of laundry, when observed with patience and care, marks an important moment in the cycle of daily life. It's a moment of transition between the demands of the day and the rest of the night. Imagine the sounds of the city as you sit in your quiet home, the occasional footstep on the cobbled streets, a distant shout from the marketplace as vendors begin to pack up their goods for the night, and the soft gurgle of the Nile flowing steadily beneath the star-filled sky. The rhythm of the city never truly stops, even though it has shifted from the frenetic pace of midday to the serene calm of the evening. The pace slows, but life continues in a different, more introspective way. You might take a moment to think of the roles the laundry ritual plays in all this, how it ties you, your home, and your community to something deeper than the mundane work of washing linens. Clothing for the ancient Egyptians wasn't just a necessity, it was a symbol. Garments were frequently imbued with symbolism, especially those worn by priests, the pharaoh, and the gods themselves. The way these garments were treated, washed, pressed, and carefully stored, reflected not only the status of the wearer, but also their relationship with the divine. Cleanliness wasn't merely about personal hygiene, it was about ritual purity. The Egyptians believed that through the act of cleansing and preserving clothing, they were inviting the gods into their daily lives. The preparation of garments was a microcosm of the greater cosmic order, a gesture toward the divine that extended from the household to the temples and beyond. But not all laundry rituals were for the elite. The common folk, who often had less access to the finest linens, still engaged in the daily act of washing and maintaining their clothing. For them, it was a more practical matter, preserving the simplicity of their garments for another day of work. Yet even for the poor, the act of caring for clothing was one that maintained a sense of dignity. You would carefully wash your tunic, stitch up any worn hems, and press it out, knowing that this act of care would ensure that you could face another day of labor with confidence. Whether your tunic was made of finely spun linen or rougher homespun fabric, the importance of cleanliness and neatness could not be overstated. It wasn't just about wearing clothes. It was about wearing them well, about honoring the life you lived and the work you did. As the stars begin to twinkle over the Nile, you feel the connection between yourself and the ancient rhythms of Egypt deepen. This is where the past and present meet. The act of cleaning, washing, and pressing garments was not only an everyday chore, but a timeless ritual passed down from generation to generation. The Egyptians had a profound understanding of how the mundane tasks of daily life were intertwined with the sacred. As you sit back and look at the glowing lamps of the Nile city, the quiet of the evening settles in, and the meaning of it all becomes clear. Historians still argue whether the act of laundry in ancient Egypt was ever fully divorced from religious practice. Some suggest it was an entirely secular affair focused on hygiene and social status. Others point to the deep ties between cleanliness and ritual purity, suggesting that laundry was yet another method by which Egyptians sought to maintain a connection to their gods. Either way, there's no denying the importance of the act of washing and caring for clothing, as it was practiced for centuries. And now, as the night stretches on, you rest in the knowledge that tomorrow, the rituals of cleaning and maintaining the garments will begin again. Just as the Nile rises and falls, so too does the cycle of washing, storing, and pressing. There is comfort in the repetition, in the knowledge that the work you do today will carry through to the next, keeping you connected to the timeless rhythms of Egypt. You're part of a story that stretches back thousands of years, a quiet guardian of a tradition that holds meaning far beyond the folds of fabric. The morning sun rises over the Nile, casting its golden rays over the land, painting everything in a soft amber glow. The bustle of the city slowly awakens as the market begins to come alive. The first sounds of merchants setting up their stalls, the clink of bronze scales, and the chatter of people bargaining for the best deals all fill the air. But even in this early hour, there's a distinct sense of purpose. The first few beams of sunlight reflecting off the river have a quiet weight to them, just as your morning routine holds its own weight in the grand order of things. It's no longer just about getting the laundry done. Now it's about the ritual that follows and the significance of starting the day with everything in its right place. As the first light spills across the shores of the Nile, the act of laundering and preparing your garments takes on new meaning. You carefully fold the clothes, each garment representing a different moment of the day, from the busy merchant in the marketplace to the pharaoh in his opulent palace. For the everyday Egyptian, the act of folding and storing clothes was a personal statement, a kind of ritual that showed respect for both the self and the gods. Your clothing, after all, was your outer expression to the world. It's what people saw first, and it spoke to your station, your discipline, and your place in society. While you work through the daily tasks, you begin to think about the larger context of Egyptian society. The ancient Egyptians were notorious for their understanding of order and balance. From the moment they laid out the first plans for their monumental pyramids to the way they structured their daily routines, everything had its place. Their belief in Ma'at, the concept of cosmic order, was evident in every facet of their society. Even the simplest tasks like laundry fit into this grand scheme. The act of washing clothes wasn't just about keeping things clean. It was about aligning your actions with the divine will, maintaining harmony between the physical world and the spiritual one. For the Egyptians, this principle extended beyond just cleanliness. It touched on almost every part of life, how they treated their homes, how they cared for their families, and how they prepared their food. Everything they did was part of a larger design, woven together with a care and precision that still baffles historians to this day. Some believe that the Egyptians' attention to order and balance was why they managed to sustain one of the world's longest-lasting civilizations. The daily rituals, like laundering clothes, were the quiet, consistent thread that kept it all together, the invisible structure that held the empire's power, religion, and identity in place. As you finish folding the last of the clothes, you're left with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the work of the day has been completed. The linen is smooth, the garments crisp, each piece carefully placed in its rightful spot. There's something serene about the ritual of folding clothes, something meditative in the quiet repetition. It's not a task that demands constant attention, but rather one that rewards patience and diligence. In this sense, it mirrors the larger rhythms of life in ancient Egypt. There's a certain wisdom in taking the time to do things properly to make sure that every fold, every stitch is in its right place. You are contributing to the orderly flow of time, ensuring that the chaos of the world is kept at bay, if only for a little while. Historians are still uncertain about whether the Egyptian approach to daily tasks, like laundry, was a conscious effort to maintain spiritual and cosmic harmony. Some argue that these practices were simply practical habits, developed out of necessity and convenience. Others, however, see these actions as a way to honor the gods and maintain a connection with the divine. The fact remains that these rituals were crucial to daily life in ancient Egypt, a subtle yet essential part of a culture that thrived on order, cleanliness, and balance. As the day moves forward and the marketplace begins to swell, with the noises of traders and shoppers, you can feel the energy shift in the air. The quiet stillness of the morning has given way to the bustling chaos of the day, but in this transition, you find a sense of peace. You've taken care of what needs to be taken care of, and now you can move on to the next task secure in the knowledge that you've done your part in keeping the rhythm of life going. As the heat of the day continues to rise over the ancient city, the market becomes a swirl of activity, each person busy with their tasks, their conversations, their trades. The air grows thick with the scent of spices, fresh produce, and the earthy aroma of clay pots baking under the sun. It's the kind of heat that sinks into your skin, that makes your clothes stick a little too closely to your body, reminding you that every movement is wrapped in the weight of the day's labor. It's around this time that the laundry shifts in importance, not just as a practical necessity, but as a mark of status. You may think of laundry as an everyday mundane task, but in ancient Egypt, it was more than that. For those in the upper echelons of society, the quality of their linens and the care with which their garments were washed spoke volumes about their place in the world. Clean clothes were a symbol of dignity, of purity, of respect for the gods. The more elaborate and finely woven the linen, the more attention was paid to its upkeep, the more it spoke to the wearer's rank. Even in the simplest households where water was drawn from the Nile, and baskets of clothes were washed in the public baths, there was a palpable awareness of the connection between cleanliness and honor. This wasn't just about looking good for your neighbors. It was about presenting yourself as someone who respected both your ancestors and the divine forces that governed the world. The pharaoh himself, no matter his wealth or power, would have insisted that his linens be treated with the utmost care. His robes were symbols of his divine right to rule, and their condition was part of the cosmic balance that held the land together. But as you walk through the busy marketplace, you realize there's a difference between the elite and the common folk when it comes to laundering. While the elite might have the luxury of servants washing their garments in private baths, the lower classes were more reliant on communal spaces. These public baths, often located by the river, became centers for socializing for gossip and for the kind of communal spirit that bound the community together. Laundry wasn't just a solitary act, it was a social one, where friends and neighbors met to wash their clothes, share news, and create bonds. You also notice that the process of laundry in ancient Egypt was incredibly different from how we think about it today. There were no washing machines, no detergents, and no fancy fabric softeners. Instead, it was all about hands-on work, scrubbing, rinsing, and wringing out clothes in the Nile's cool waters. And of course, the ancient Egyptians had their own unique ways of treating the fabrics to keep them fresh. One technique they used, and one that still holds up today, was the application of natural ingredients like plant-based oils and clay to soften fabrics and keep them from wearing too thin. The famous Egyptian linen, often made from flax, was not just beautiful to look at, but also durable. and capable of withstanding the elements. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians used certain cleaning techniques as part of their religious practices. Some believe that the process of washing clothes had spiritual significance, representing the act of purifying oneself before entering the presence of the gods or performing rituals. The ritual cleansing of the body before spiritual activities is a tradition that spans many ancient cultures, and it's possible that the ancient Egyptians viewed laundering their clothes in much the same way as a way to symbolically wash away impurities and align themselves with the divine forces that controlled the world. As you reflect on the social and religious implications of laundry in ancient Egypt, you begin to notice how even the simplest task can become imbued with deeper meaning. You feel that sense of connection with the people of the past, their understanding of the world, their respect for cleanliness and purity, their devotion to maintaining balance and order in every part of their lives. Even in something as seemingly mundane as laundry, there's a rhythm, a pattern, a greater purpose that ties it all together. And now, as the sun sinks lower in the sky, the heat of the day begins to give way to the coolness of the evening breeze. The sounds of the market soften as people begin to pack up their wares, and the once bustling streets start to quiet. It's the moment when everything begins to feel still again, the moment when the city breathes a little easier, and the constant hum of life slows. It's in this time, this quiet interlude, before the night settles fully over Egypt, that you find the true significance of what you've been doing. You've washed your clothes, folded them, and packed them away, but you've also, in a sense, participated in the timeless rhythm of Egyptian life. The work has not just been about getting the laundry done, it's been about honoring the past, the people, and the gods who made it all possible. As the evening deepens, you glance once more at the pile of linens neatly folded and set aside for the next day. You feel a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the task is complete, but you also sense the continuity of the ritual. Tomorrow, you'll rise again, and the cycle will begin anew. And as the cool wind brushes against your skin, you can't help but think that maybe, just maybe, the Egyptians had it all figured out. Maybe laundry was never just about the clothes, it was about the connection between the everyday and the divine, between the mundane and the extraordinary. The sun has fully set now, and the city of ancient Egypt is draped in the velvet of the night. The sounds of the market have faded, completely replaced by the soft murmur of the river and the occasional clink of pottery being placed carefully on shelves in preparation for the next day. The bustling streets are now quiet, but the traces of life remain everywhere. Hints of bread still hanging in the air, faint remnants of incense swirling from temples, the final flickers of torchlight casting shadows across stone walls. As you settle into the stillness of the evening, you begin to understand something about the rhythm of life in Egypt, the way the days unfold with a predictable cadence, like the ebb and flow of the Nile. The laundry has always been part of that rhythm. And now, as the city winds down, you feel that strange satisfaction of having been part of something larger. You didn't just wash linens today. You participated in the heartbeat of a civilization, in the unbroken cycle of work and rest, cleanliness and ritual. The Egyptians understood that the simplest tasks were often the most significant. As you prepare to settle in for the night, you reflect once again on the day's work. The linens you've cleaned, the fabrics you've handled, all feel imbued with history now. You think of the priests who may have worn these very clothes to perform sacred rites, or the nobles who dined in splendor, while servants washed their linens in the river. The thoughts swirl through your mind like the cool breeze outside, bringing with them a sense of reverence for the ordinary. And then as the stars begin to dot the sky, the wind picks up once more, rustling the palm trees, carrying with it the promise of another day. The ritual will begin again tomorrow, just as it has for centuries. But for now, in the calm of the night, you allow yourself to breathe deeply, feeling the weight of the day's work lift off your shoulders. The laundry is done. The cycle continues. In the distance, the river flows endlessly its waters, carrying the stories of 1,000 years. And you, in this small but significant way, are a part of it. As the cool night air envelops the city, you let your mind wander back to the quiet rituals of the Egyptians, their faith in the gods, their respect for the earth and its cycles, and their reverence for every small task that contributed to the greater good. Maybe there is something timeless about the simplicity of laundry, something that connects us all, past and present, in a way we often overlook. For in that humble act, there is balance, there is harmony, and most of all, there is a reflection of the world itself, a never-ending cycle with no beginning and no end, only the rhythm of life and death, of rest and labor, of purity and imperfection. Now the wind has shifted again, bringing with it the faint scent of salt water from the Mediterranean. You take one last deep breath, feeling the coolness of the night seep into your skin, and you smile to yourself. Tomorrow, you'll rise once more, and the world will turn again. The laundry will be waiting, the rituals will continue, and Egypt will remain unchanging, eternal, and as full of wonder as the first day it was built. But for tonight, it is enough to rest.